and we are doing Boys Night Out. And we're going to be talking about our episode 73 on Find Me Guilty, and we've brought our Jersey fellas from Don't Waste Your Hate on to talk about this movie. They've listened to our episode that just got released, and they're going to give us some critiques, and we're going to have just some organic conversation based on the movie and whatever else they want to talk about. They're really good guys. If you've listened to the show, you'll know that we love them. And so here they are. It's Jeff, the Invalid Beard, and Tony Rockamora of Don't Waste Your Hate, and Robert is on the line with us as well. How you doing, boys?
What's going on,
guys? Thanks for having us.
Yeah, in preparation, I went to my mom's house, and I had spaghetti and meatballs today, so I'm ready to go.
All right.
Guido style.
Ready to talk about Mr. Diesel.
Yeah, so is that like an actual thing, like, you know, the old country mama makes a recipe, special meatballs, special sauce, all that stuff? That's like a real thing?
My mom definitely does it. We do a lot of Sunday dinners with, like, you know, spaghetti, meatballs, all that shit. That is a real thing.
All right, awesome.
We did think that it was a little curious that you guys decided to have, you know, the inaugural episode with us, you know, on a Northeast Jersey, New York, you know, Philly mob gangster, you know, kind of movie with Jeff and Tony. So I'm sure there's nothing there.
Well, if I recall, you guys said you were interested in doing this one. Though last year we talked about having you guys on to talk about The Godfather. And we just never got things working out, and then we changed our show a little bit at the beginning of the year to kind of, you know, cut down on guests, unfortunately, which is why we have this show. So we could talk Godfather a little bit. I mean, it's back in there somewhere. I've seen it a couple of times. But The Find Me Guilty, I think, was a pretty fun movie. Our position on it was essentially that it makes the government appear to be the villains that they really are, and that is probably one of the contributing factors to why it didn't do so well in the theaters. I think it made enough to buy a rib, or you know, just one rib, to borrow from Chris Rock in whatever movie that was. Can I get a rib? Can I just smell it?
Sorry, not following.
Yeah, I have no idea what the hell Dan's talking about. But yeah, this movie did not do well. Made like bus money fair.
Well, it was a loss, right? Net in terms of you know, profit loss.
Oh, big time. Yeah, it lost. It only recovered about 20 to 30% of the budget.
Well, I'll tell you what. When the movie first started, I was like, "Oh my god, this is going to be a total piece of garbage." Like, because there was like some weird transitions, like between scenes, like the camera transitions. But by the end of it, I actually wasn't hating it. You know, I enjoyed Vin Desiel, actually, and obviously Peter Dinklage was cool too.
Yeah, for anybody that's for whatever reason wanting to somewhat change their view of Vin Diesel as you know, the Fast and Furious guy. You know, I don't think you know, he's not entering Daniel Day-Lewis territory, but no, he showed that he could act, and it was a convincing character, and it was definitely, you know, something different than what you know, whatever else I had ever seen him in. And yeah, definitely believed that he sort of got into the role.
Yeah, we thought
I was
it might.
going to ask you, yeah, how authentic his performance was, if you had a take on that.
Mark Sinclair, you're referring to? Yeah, I was trying to look up to see if he actually had any Italian heritage, and he, at least according to Wikipedia, has some combination of like German, Scottish, and then he never met his biological father, but he said he was definitely, I forget how he phrased it, but basically some sort of minority. So I guess it was just all an act. I'll have to ask the resident expert Tony here if he found it convincing.
Wait, is that his name, Mark Sinclair?
Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, believe it or not, Vin Diesel is not his birth name.
Well, I knew some chick with the last name Diesel, so I just assumed it was a real thing.
Diesel is a thing. It's named
Well,
after a guy, right?
That's true. Okay. All right, my bad. Let's just cut that part out.
No way, man. This is live.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was fairly authentic. One thing I actually did appreciate was, and I'm guessing it's because it was based on a true story, is they actually had like pretty decent like Italian dudes' names. Because sometimes people try to do mob stuff and they don't do enough research and they have like shitty names, you know, like. But these sounded like legit Italian last names. Like I'm thinking specifically, I don't know if you ever watched Peaky Blinders. It's a show on Netflix. It has like 3 seasons, maybe 4.
Is that got someone's in
Cillian
that?
Murphy. Cillian Murphy is the main dude. Also has Tom Hardy. He's been in it a lot. He plays a Jewish gangster, like a London Jewish gangster. So he's probably like the biggest name in there, right, Jeff?
Solomon. Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, I think some of those other actors are probably bigger in other circles, but yeah, his character, his character became so like dominant that I think they ended up like writing in more for him than they had originally intended to because of how popular it was. But yeah,
that's a good show. But I remember that the Italian guy they had this season, he was like basically like a Godfather knockoff type guy. He was played by Adrian Brody, actually, I believe. And his like it wasn't like a real Italian last name. It like sounded like it, but if I like took Italian classes, so like it wouldn't really be a real name in Italian. So I did appreciate in this movie they were authentic in that way anyway.
All right, so I wanted to ask you guys. Robert corrected me, like the grammar Nazi that he is, on the last name of the crime family. Is it Lucchese or Lucchese?
I think it's Lucchese.
Yeah,
Lucchese.
First one sounds right. Yeah.
How is it spelled? Is it Lu like CCH something?
CHEESE.
Yeah, if you have in Italian, if you have like a CH, it's actually like a K sound most of the time. So yeah, it's Lucchese.
All right, well,
I mean, even
I stand corrected.
Yeah.
I mean, even the Guineas over here. Even the Guineas over here, they say Italian words wrong all the time. So I mean, it don't matter.
Awesome.
For the baseball fans out there, there's actually I'm a big baseball guy in fantasy baseball, and there's a brand new on the Padres, a pitcher who like recently made his debut, and he has this name. It's Joey Lucchese. So there you go.
Nice.
There you go. Well, you guys being from Jersey, I wondered if you had a different opinion on the mob in general. I mean, this movie really kind of paints the mob not necessarily as good guys, but certainly innocent in terms of this ridiculous case the government brings against them in terms of the RICO Act. Did you, I mean, if you had been on that trial, would you have had a different opinion? Or, I mean,
if they were on the jury,
more. Yeah, if you were on the jury, I mean, do you have more cause to hate the mob than, you know, us guys over here on the West Coast who don't really necessarily have as much experience with them?
Go ahead, Jeff.
You know, it's hard to. I mean, everyone has their own perspective, and it's hard to know what other people around the country, you know, think. I'm actually, just by coincidence, like getting through The Sopranos now, and I'm more than halfway through. You know, and you watch all the other mob movies, and most of my friends, I'm not Italian, but almost all of my friends growing up are Italian, and you see all the mob movies, and for me, it's like a bit fatiguing. You kind of get beat over the head with the genre, and it's kind of a love hate thing, and then you mix in like the libertarian views, and I mean, look, it's not like we're running into the mob or the mafia like on a day-to-day basis here, although I will say in my dealings in my job, and I know in speaking to other people, like the mafia still has in its various forms, I think, a stronger hold here than maybe anywhere in the country, specifically in the construction business, especially as you get into the, the suburbs of New York City, and then of course in New York City. So it's definitely still a thing. There's not like that same day-to-day element that I think you had at different points in history. But yeah, just speaking for myself, not for Tony. Yeah, it's kind of kind of a mixed bag. And I listened to your guys' thoughts on how they were portraying the government versus the mob in this movie. And yeah, they definitely, I would agree, they did not make the government all that likable and endearing. I might have a slightly different take on the way that they portrayed the other side, which is actually something that I liked about the movie, because I kept going back and forth. Like there's, like Tony was kind of saying before about Peaky Blinders, where a lot of times when they do these mob movies, they very, very easily fall into these little cliches, which if you're like familiar with actual Italians or you've seen enough of these movies, like it could turn you off pretty quickly. And every time I felt like this movie was doing that, they sort of brought me back with something that seemed somewhat like sincere. And I don't know, it probably helped that they were using, I guess, actual testimony from court. Maybe that anchored the writing a bit. But I actually found, just in my own viewing, that they made both sides kind of not look great. And then my personal takeaway, and what I hope people took away from it, was sort of, it's a bit of an indictment of the criminal justice system on the whole, because you could not like any of the characters involved and still sort of see how, the realities of how that system operates. So I don't know if that answers the question, but those were my thoughts on that.
Yeah, not necessarily that these are good guys, but this whole system is obviously terrible.
Yeah, like, did you guys watch the Making a Murder documentary that was like a phenomenon for a little bit?
All right, prepare for a Robert Rent incoming here.
Boy, did I. I watched that and got super infuriated about the state basically attacking these Forrest Gump level people and basically framing them for murder and throwing them in jail for essentially their entire lives. It was horrific to watch.
Yeah, well, I was, and yeah, you can have a whole, I'm sure, conversation about that. But I kind of had a similar feeling about that. I don't know if I feel differently about I forget the family name now from the documentary. But
it's the name of the business. Can't remember.
Yeah, but the accused there, like my takeaway from all that was kind of that, there are really no good people in this entire thing. But maybe that's a mistake to go into some of these things and think, oh, I need like my like super sort of infallible hero who's a good. If nothing else, maybe they make mistakes, but they're a good person. Like deep down, every movie, every show, they always try to inject those characters. And again, just my takeaway from watching the movie is I didn't really feel that way about probably really any of the characters. And that made it, I thought, a little refreshing, and because they weren't trying to jam that narrative down your throat, especially because I knew that this was based on a true story, and that if they were going to try to push that narrative, that would probably be fabricated. But then you also, it allows your mind to sort of move on to some other like types of analysis of the movie and what's going on. And I think what I would hope the casual viewer watching it would think about in terms of the criminal justice system is like, all right, look, here's some guys that are, I think everybody would agree, are probably not good guys, right? But is what the government doing here, and the way that they portray the prosecutor, who was definitely not likable, and they made him not likable. But is there anything about the way that the police are treating Jackie while he's locked up, and the liberties that they take, and the pressure that they put on, and the whole nonsense of RICO in general? Is there anything about that seems like unlikely, that it's exaggerated, that that's not the way that it really is? And I think that most people that don't think in terms of like just criticizing the state and the libertarian type thoughts, I think they would probably agree. Like, no, I bet that's how it is. And so I do think movies like this do a service in that sense, and that they sort of shine a light on, what, is this the way that these guys are supposed to be better? That's the way that they're portraying themselves. And I think the takeaway from the movie is at best, they're just as bad as the mobster guys. And you definitely are left feeling that, if nothing else, in this particular situation, the state was wrong, and the mobster guys, who you would probably hate in any other situation, and I'm sure these guys have done really terrible things, the real people, you feel like maybe justice was done.
Yeah, that's a lot of information to take all at once there, but
Sorry.
I think you're pretty spot on. Our take, if I recall, was essentially that it's one mafia organization versus another mafia organization, and they're bringing the smaller one into their turf and leaning on them pretty heavily to try to get a conviction, and because they don't like competition, right? It's the thing that Ron Paul had on his desk. The government hates competition. And so I'm just wondering, another comment that we had made was that we felt like mafia movies and TV shows are popular, and they're popular because there's action and there's, double crossing and violence, and that we felt like it was similar to the Wild West, with westerns having a lot of gun violence, but in reality the gun violence was very minimal in history. And I surmise that that's also similar with how the mafia actually functions in real life versus how it's portrayed in film.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I mean, you basically, to go back to what you said about a smaller mafia versus a larger mafia that is the state. I used to have I still have mixed feelings about this because, okay, people like Rothbard and these guys will essentially say that the mafia the state is like a mafia. I mean, I think Dave Smith coined it pretty well, where he says the state is just a mafia posing as a human rights organization, right? So I kind of have some. I'm not a violent person. I don't agree with violence, but I do have some respect for the fact that there is like there are groups of people who are willing to essentially try to get like a little foothold on the use of force and violence. I mean, I don't really appreciate it. It's not my thing, but I appreciate that someone is willing to say, like, no, I don't recognize the legitimacy of the state as the sole arbiter of or the sole user of force. So
they're competitor to it.
It's kind of like
they see themselves that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously they deal with their own. They have their own dispute resolution. Like you mentioned it in your episode. They kind of they figure out ways to get through their business without killing each other all the time, most of the time. And I think you are right. There's a reason that a lot of the guys in the movie were old mobsters, because they're not just out like in The Godfather. Like it's a big deal when they go to the mattresses. They go to war and they start killing each other in the streets, and they're like, hey, yeah, we got to do this every 10, 15 years or whatever to get all the bad blood out of here. But this is bad for business. Blood is a big expense, right? That's the whole Sollozzo thing in The Godfather. And eventually they come together and they say, yeah, we got to fucking stop killing each other, man. We got to figure this shit out. So I think it is true what you say, that most of the time they probably are not just out murdering each other. And that's why you get all these old men who have been, made guys for 50 years, because it's not all violence. They carve their little turf. They figure out whatever racket they're going to be in, and they generally probably get along fairly peacefully.
Yeah, and that was another thing that we related to the government, in that all of the charges and all the, I don't want to say ad hom, but all the negative things we're saying about the defendants was all projection. Like everything they said about what the guys were doing that were bad was exactly and precisely what the government was doing, just on a larger scale, a more colossal scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they called them a group of leeches, right? So, I mean, I'm sure everyone, when they saw that line, it was like, yeah, well, that's what you are, motherfucker, like, for real. Like, it's like, yeah, we're just literally just a group of people who are extracting money from other. I mean, that's what the mob does when they offer people protection, all that kind of thing. It's just the government's no different, really. I mean, that's
what I view my tax money as. I pay it so they don't fuck with me.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. It's just you have to sign some paperwork when you do it for the government. But I mean, and it has that pretense of some official thing because there's like a code, like a written code, like a W-2 form and a whatever federal form 841 you got to fill out. But when it comes down to it, it's all the same thing.
Yeah, I was reading. I don't normally read the New York Times, but there was an article posted in Tom Woods' group, and it was all about the state of ISIS. And it was written by this guy who investigated ISIS for, ever since, I don't know, like 2009 or something like that. He would take trips with a group of investigators, and they'd go around and dig in like trash barrels and outhouses and old office buildings and anything they could find that would detail kind of the internal structure of the Islamic State. And the writer seemed to be gobsmacked, just completely surprised that the ISIS essentially runs like a government. And they were and of course, they're a criminal organization. They're going to run like a government. They made far more. It turns out they made what was it? I forget, 100 times more in taxes than they did in, say, oil sales or whatever their purported income was, or from external donations from other states and that sort of thing.
All right, so Robert, forgive my ignorance here, and I probably should listen a little bit more to Kyle Ancelone of Foreign Policy Focus, but when they claim, talk about ISIS has claimed more territory, they're taxing the people in that territory. Is that what you're saying?
No, they physically control those areas. They have soldiers on the ground. They're enforcing Sharia law. They're collecting taxes. And the
so
fun
they're being
thing
a government.
was,
yeah,
they're being a government. The fun thing was, and the thing that they were embarrassed by, apparently, the locals that were taken over, after they were taken over by ISIS, shit ran better. So the streets got cleaned up. The electricity was on more often. The water worked more often. So a lot of people were
better than Flint, Michigan.
So yeah, their government actually ran better. Now, of course, their methods were horrific. They would fine you if they thought you trimmed your beard. If they caught a woman out alone, they would attack her. They talked about one lady who got punched in the face and had trouble seeing for the rest of her life. Anyway, of course they're brutal and horrific. But the funny thing is that I was reading the whole article and I'm like, yeah, of course, they're a government, and the whole time they're decrying the methods of ISIS, and they taxed them for this sale of wheat, and then they taxed it again when this guy sold it again. Oh my goodness. And it was yeah, don't you live in the United States? You know how things work here? It sounded like ISIS is essentially the U.S. government, but with, religion. And
yeah.
I just found the whole thing hilariously ironic.
Well, you're kind of making me think about relating this back to the mob. It definitely reminds me of Anatomy of the State. I mean, that first part of Anatomy of the State is really cool because he's basically going through the history of how the state became a thing, and it starts off, from what I recall, it starts off as you just go and conquer people and you enslave them, but after a while you figure out, hey, instead of just enslaving them outright, killing all the men and just taking the women, you make them pay tribute to you instead. And then, the state, over time, it becomes like a more sophisticated version of that original, use of violence to take over an area.
Right. They're free range cattle now, so they produce more.
Yeah. Yeah. And Molyneux has that great, the story of your enslavement video, which kind of outlines some of that as well. But I think the mafia is just like a slightly less sophisticated, less codified state. They're right on that road to that Rothbard lays out in the beginning of that essay.
And
right.
And Tony, one of the scenes, one of the parts in the beginning of The Godfather that I like is when the one, it's the day of his daughter's wedding, and you can go in and make a request of the Godfather, and within reason, he's going to grant it. And the one guy comes in and he talks about like just this like brutal beating and I guess rape that his daughter experienced at the hands of these two men. And the Godfather says, never in the entire time that we've known each other have you asked us, over for coffee, have you tried to be my friend, and now you come to me in need, and if you had done that, these people would be suffering right now. And he said, well, I didn't want to get in any trouble, and I wanted to, just sort of live a quiet life. And he says, yeah, but look, now justice is not being served, and you feel like you need to go somewhere else. And basically convinces him, hey, come into my debt, and I'll take care of this for you. And that's how this works. And it's really like, hey, we're the competitor to the guys that you had been siding with, basically. And most people don't think along those lines, of course, but that's the way they view it. Which is, you can see that in this movie too, when they speak to the prosecutors and when they're coming in and they're getting offered deals and they're very cavalier and like relaxed and are drinking their wine comfortably, and they genuinely sort of view the government as just another mafia, one that they have much less respect for, and with poorer food. So there's a lot of overlap there.
Yeah, the one thing that stood out in this movie was the principle that Jackie had, and I don't know if that's like a mafia thing, or was that just him as an individual? Because it seems like they do have a code of honor that they try to stick to, and that is one thing that makes them different than the bigger mafia that went after them.
I'm not a rat.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that code is a real thing when it comes to, mafia stuff, but I also think that kind of a code is something that maybe it was a more followed thing in the past, like when the American Mafia kind of really started going, and maybe the early part of the 20th century. And I think like as generations go on, and the Italians start to maybe assimilate more, and they're not just in these little isolated communities and in Brooklyn or in Mulberry Street in Manhattan. I think that code, I think they call it like omerta or something in Sicilian, and I think that code kind of starts fading away as the older generations start fading away and their kids start becoming more and more American. But that definitely was a thing, and I think it still is a thing for whatever mafia still exists. I mean, and Jeff did say before, I mean, there are definitely like still mob shit going on, especially in the ports in New Jersey and New York. Like, I think the mob still runs all the ports up here. So all the major commercial stuff that comes in through the ports, the mafia has something to do with it, and maybe it's a little more legitimate now, but I mean, it's a thing.
And the trash disposal, and we know of some activities down at the Jersey Shore, like the boardwalk. I think
there are all these things tied to like unions and such. Like, are they very closely intertwined with union activity, and that's what they use as leverage?
I know all the ports. I mean, all the workers are unionized, and all it's all intertwined for sure. Yeah.
There's a one story that I heard, and I'm not, I don't want to overstate like my experience with this sort of thing, but it's one of those things where it goes from sort of like mythology to reality really, really quickly. Where we were working on like a site selection sort of project, trying to locate an operation in an area, like a new manufacturer. And they were talking about, putting up a building in a particular place, and they got to a certain point, and I was like very much on the edge, doing some research. But I learned later that there was a call that was received from one of our partners, from one of these, quote, union guys, whatever they are, basically saying like, hey, I don't know if you ever worked around here before, but this is how things go. And you reach out to these people first, and then, you pay this to this guy. Then you make sure that this many, we'll let you know how many guys got to be on your job site, like this and that. And if you have a problem with that, you just let me know, and we can figure it out. And
well, it sounds like when I tried to get some work done on my house.
Yeah. Well,
I call the county. All right, not to derail you.
No, you're totally right. No, and so I wanted to ask you guys because you were talking about it on your episode, and I don't know if you felt this way, but that scene, I guess, getting to, and I don't know who created the movie and what their background is and the writers and all that stuff, and I don't know if certain people involved in the making of a show or a movie are able to like sneak little themes in on their own that it's sort of unbeknownst to other people involved or what. But that scene with the prosecutor where he was just sort of losing his shit when the one of the guys on his team mentioned that one of the jurors thought that I guess Jackie or whoever was cute, and he just sort of lost his mind, and he had that one line that if the movie was more popular, I think the line would have been more popular. It was like, and sometimes they kill people. But just talking about how they're taking money from you every time you buy concrete, every time you do this, they're taking money, and obviously, like it seems like very unsubtle and obvious to me. Obviously, being hypocritical about his own organization, and that the government in that case and the mafia come off as the same. And I thought that was kind of like a little on the nose, and I don't know if that's because of my views or watching other movies and shows similar to this, but it sounded like you guys might have differed on that a little bit.
Well, I think Robert, you saw some stuff in there, and I was like, well, it might have been just happenstance, coincidental.
Yeah, I was more wondering about it because, yeah, you're right. It did seem a little on the nose. So it seemed like that was the writer's voice being interjected. But I could also see that line kind of glossing over the heads of the majority of viewers. Because, I mean, me being from a libertarian doesn't really allow me to see it any other way. But if I wasn't, maybe I would just, be more sympathetic to the prosecutor, I guess, and just to his frustrations with having to try and prosecute the mob, who he sees as these terrible people. And he's, like, essentially taking the Machiavellian route of just, like, ends justify the means, no matter what way we got to do it, but it's going to be okay in the end because we're getting these bad guys. We're putting these bad guys behind bars and off the streets, and somehow that will, at least justice will be done for all these terrible things that these people have done, regardless of whether or not these people are actually guilty of this crime that we're charging them all with. I don't know, man. I really don't know if that was, an author's interjection, like, because usually when you see a movie making a statement or a book or anything like that, you can kind of see you can kind of hear the author's voice in there somewhere. Somebody's making a statement somehow, somebody making a claim of some kind. And it very much seemed like this movie was making the claim that these two organizations are essentially the same thing. Just one's a lot more successful, and one wears the pomp and circumstance of legitimacy, while the other is vilified as a criminal organization.
But just one quick point. But if that is the takeaway, and that was my takeaway, that's the way that it felt. That's what I liked about the movie, was that I didn't think they were like overly glorifying any like one protagonist. Then that's a pretty radical view for a movie that they were hoping wouldn't be fringe, even though it ended up being fringe. To equate the government with the mob. I mean, that's sort of a big deal, no? A message to be put out there in popular culture.
Nope. I think they thought that it was going to be far more popular than it was. I actually had the DVD and I watched the TV spots for it, and they had 3 or 4 spots for it, and they're talking it up pretty hard, and normal, right? Like you of course want to say your product's good. But one of the last ones was after the critics had given their reviews of it, and they cited 3 or 4 different critics saying how amazing the movie was. It's like Sidney Lumet's crowning achievement, a masterpiece. I don't know if you guys know who this guy is, but he was a big-time Hollywood director in the 50s all the way up to the 80s. He did Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, 12 Angry Men, Network, The Verdict, what else? Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, Murder on the Orient Express, Dog Day Afternoon. And he did this movie when he was like 81 years old.
Whoa. Those are big movies. Those are all huge movies.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised, and especially the the content of those movies, like 12 Angry Men was like 1957 or something like that, and it's all courtroom drama just like this. I'm just wondering if maybe there's not something to the idea that maybe he's using this as his final, just a few years before he died, sending that message out.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that might be true, but when I just thought also that it's kind of just inherent in organized crime, in the mafia, that theme is going to come up over and over again. I mean, I feel like that theme comes up throughout the Sopranos, throughout Peaky Blinders, throughout The Godfather for sure. They're always like trying to become quote unquote legitimate, right? They're always trying to get into that, more respectable role in society. And a lot of times it's like, oh, I want to be in the government. I want to be a senator. I want to be a congressman, whatever. But throughout all of them, they're kind of working with the government. Like the government tolerates them to some degree. They're not just straight putting them down all the time. They're trying to, work around things and, work deals with them. And I guess it's because ultimately they can't control what everyone is doing. They would like to be able to control everything, but they can't. But yeah, I think just in general that it's just inherent in organized crime that, okay, this is competition for the government in some way, and the government can't control it, and that's why that's probably why these themes seem to pop up all the time. And I don't know if it's necessarily like, okay, this guy's like an anarchist and he doesn't believe in the fact that the government has a monopoly on force, but it's just inherent in the fact that the mafia exists that they are a challenge to that monopoly on force.
Right, but also they exist because the government has made so many things illegal that really shouldn't be. And so it pushes these things underground and it provides a market, or an unmet need that somebody's going to go and fulfill. And so if they don't want to have a mafia, then don't make all this shit illegal, essentially, right?
Right,
Yeah,
and you're not going to get rid of it because, I mean, you're talking about drugs, you're talking about prostitution, a.k.a. the world's oldest profession. I mean, these things are
and gambling, it's like...
Sure, yeah. I mean, these things are vices. These have been around with humans since there have been humans. So to think that you could just write down on a piece of paper that, thou shalt not do these things, and then you're just going to somehow get rid of them.
Well, it takes stone tablets for that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but let's say everything does get legalized, right? All of those vices that you just mentioned. Then what? I mean, there's still going to be people out there, willing to commit murder for hire, right? And even in an anarcho-capitalist society, that's obviously not acceptable. So there's still probably going to be some, I don't know about mafia, but some organized crime, some people who are willing to do those kind of things.
Right, but there won't be an organized crime that is deified like it is today. And there would be competing services for defense agencies and dispute resolution organizations, and the price would come down and the quality would go up, and there'd be different strokes for different folks. I mean, I can't say that it would be perfect, and of course it wouldn't be, but it would be a hell of a lot better. There'd be very low barrier to entry to being able to compete for providing those types of services, and you'd have your pick of the litter, man. You could do whichever was the best to serve you at the price you were willing to pay.
And also the problem with prohibition and why it's sort of inevitable that the mafia is going to exist as long as the government is into prohibition business is that these are sort of like broadly high demand like areas that humanity has shown throughout time like they're always going to desire. And yeah, you're right. There could always be these like smaller, maybe organized crime groups like for murder. But is that something that the typical person is going to want to engage in? Whereas the typical person at some point wants to do drugs. The typical person at some point wants to engage in gambling, whatever else, something that's illegal by the government. And so it's almost like the mafia is like the inevitable, like other side of the coin, as long as that they're going to be in this sort of business. And then I guess sort of the last stand, if you were to eliminate all those, would be just the monopoly on like arbitration and violence and force and criminal justice and things like that. And that would still be a problem. But yeah, it's not a coincidence that the mafia, that these are the things that drive their business. And it's been said 1,000 times or a million times. But what was the worst thing for Al Capone and those types during alcohol prohibition? And that was legalization. They didn't want that to happen. That was the whole reason for their power and money.
Right, and I'm glad you brought him up, because that ties right into why RICO became a thing, because they couldn't get Al Capone for anything other than like tax evasion or something, right? And so then, you take that a generation or two further, and you're like, okay, the government's going to lower the bar for what is considered, beyond reasonable doubt conviction type thing. Doing this RICO nonsense, which I think we talked about quite a bit in the show. Do you guys have any like specialized knowledge on that? Were we off base on any of that? Essentially, they just put a group of people together, bundled them, and say, all right, if any one of you is guilty for this litany of things, then you're all going to get found guilty and get sentenced for it. And the bar is very low, and they use it as leverage to get people to flip. Basically, we're going to stack charges against you, but if you cop a plea, we'll knock a few of them off. And it's a way to get around the traditional, you have the right to face your accuser, you have the right to see the evidence that's presented against you, you have, all of these things in common law tradition, where they actually have to have a crime and a victim. But with this RICO stuff, all they have to do is establish a pattern of behavior and associations. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I know I threw out like a bunch of like half-assed questions at you guys, but go ahead, Robert. You put a finer point on it, and then we'll go to like Tony on it, and then to Jeff.
Well, no, I was just going to say it's the typical tactic of divide and conquer, where you got this monolithic organization that has this omerta, and they're not going to rat on each other, and so you threaten them with these some ridiculous horseshit law, and then get them to flip, ply them with drugs, get more of them to flip, get more to flip, more to the flip, and eventually you can actually build a case with all these eyewitness testimonies. But going back to what you said about, a private property-based society, essentially like Ancapistan or something like that, it's not that there would be, no violence. It's just that there wouldn't be any more legal violence, which is what the government is. They legalize violence. I mean, all the worst atrocities throughout human history have all been legal. I mean, the Nazis were just following orders that were given by legal authorities, which is why I kind of have a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for the mob, because at least there's no pretense. At least they're kind of honest about what violence is. Yeah, they use the violence, usually as a last resort, but they don't go around calling it rain when they're pissing on you, So.
All right, so 2 comments to that, and then we'll go to the boys, I swear.
All right.
So you just said that there'd be no legalized violence. There still would be self-defense, still violence, and it still solves a problem.
Legalized aggression. You're right. Legalized aggression.
And then the other is the things that lead to the most atrocities are legal. Sometimes, yes. Well, most times, yes. I'll concede that. But, for example, the Syria strikes. Trump went around Congress. He, as you've mentioned in the past, those were technically illegal acts that he'll, later on maybe be censured for or somehow have them deemed legal. But in the present, I think that they are considered illegal acts and they're still permissible.
Well, but
it's, a politician doing them.
Well, yeah, but the government does illegal shit all the time. I mean, if you go by what the Constitution says.
Well, yeah, everything they do is illegal.
I mean, what are you talking about?
Well, yeah, but I mean, as far as I know, a lot of these decisions to strike involve a lot of lawyers, in the conversation before they do it. They have all these. I mean, I'm not there, but from what I understand, there's a lot of lawyer involvement to figure out how we make the case after the fact that whatever we're doing now can be construed as legal. And, I guess in the case of the bombing on Syria, I mean, what would they do? They have to, for Trump to act without Congress, he has to prove that there's some kind of immediate threat, right? Isn't that like the standard that the War Powers Act puts out? I don't know. Does anybody know?
That sounds about right. Yeah, but it's not just like a material threat on the United States, but also any civilians or military personnel in a given area. So I guess you could argue that because we have projected our force, and "our" I use very loosely, in 160 odd countries, you're going to have them at risk pretty much anywhere, anytime.
Yeah, and then, I mean, whether or not chemical weapons were even used, I mean, the fact that they are, the chemical weapons thing became a big deal after World War I, right? After the mustard gas, and then I guess, or maybe it was even later than that when it became a really big deal that it was illegal according to the UN and all that stuff. And so, it's kind of like, okay, well, they're going to find justification to do it no matter what. And legality is really just, I always think about the phrase, the divine right of kings, right? Like, ultimately, it's just this fiction that they use to justify whatever they want to do. Like, they can make legal whatever they want,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was recently I think Larkin Rose did a video, and he was talking about, or maybe it was a Steemit post. If people haven't been reading him on Steemit, it's really good. Anyway, he was just talking about how there were two different court cases, I believe, if I'm getting my memory correct, where one guy's gun was declared illegal because it wasn't military grade, and the Second Amendment only protects military-grade weapons, and therefore it was illegal. And then in another case, a guy's weapon was declared military-grade and therefore illegal because the Second Amendment, something military. They just decide whatever they want. Whatever the government wants to do, they'll come up with some justification and reason for it. Some interpretation of some law. So yeah, I mean, it's a horrific and made-up tyranny. What do you want?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it can be so interpreted because, like, the Second Amendment is pretty clear, and they just trample over it. I mean, every one of the amendments for the Bill of Rights, I think only one of them or two of them are left without any imposition or being essentially annulled after the fact. But anyway, I wanted to swing us back. I forget if do you guys even remember what I had said before we went off on this?
Yeah,
tangent?
and actually, I can jump in with a thought there. So you had asked if we had any sort of unique insights into RICO, and I guess just generally, and if your interpretation of how that law was applied and how it worked and how the movie portrayed it was accurate. I definitely have no unique insight there. I mean, the way that you guys discussed it was my understanding. It sounded about right. And even if we're getting some of the finer points wrong, I think what really matters is just the general concept. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. And what I was struck by watching that, and I had, again, going back to Making a Murderer, was this is supposed to be about like justice and about like restitution, and if crimes are committed, you talked about, if there's no victim, then there's really nothing to do. And so if there were actual victims from these men, which no doubt there were, right? And they talked about them openly in court at times, like talked about, some fraud and, these were bad guys, and they're not always dealing with other bad guys, they're dealing with the general public and whatever. So I was just thinking that if I was somebody who's like who either directly or whose family was wronged by these guys, and I was in court and I was seeing these guys for what they really were, and I wasn't laughing at their their stupid pepperoni jokes and everything else, I would be furious with the prosecution and the government for one, making it out to be what is so clearly like a political move, right? And they started it off, I think, right, with Giuliani, showing that this is going to be like his legacy, right? This is the thing that he's going to be known for, and he's going to go after these families. Never mind that if you were to even wipe out these families, like you just create the power vacuum that just gets filled again, right? So it's not, it didn't have any feeling of like this is about justice. This is about getting justice for the families. They never talked about it in the movie. I don't know if in the actual court cases, I do wish they got a little bit more into, like, they talked about like the hundreds and hundreds of exhibits and all the evidence, what those crimes were exactly. But this whole idea of RICO and just like guilt by association and being in the proximity and being working within an organization that is doing things and, like tax evasion. Look, these guys murderers, did they steal? Did they commit horrific crimes? Who were the victims of those crimes? And then those people are the ones that should be involved in these court cases. What did they get for their pain? And and it's just when you have such a broken criminal justice system like we do, it's almost like you can look at any element of it and become infuriated. And that's what I always end up thinking about when I'm watching some of these movies. That very often these very real victims don't ever really get talked about, and they certainly don't get any kind of justice in the end.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's been politicized and bureaucratized. Like it gives them an excuse to keep the monolith growing, and it loses the original intent. I think now it becomes about making a show of things and being able to say that you went after crime and that you get more funds, more you get more elected, and you get a bigger staff and all of those things, and the whole pursuit of justice gets lost in that. Like the original goal shifts, and it becomes less about that, and that's just more ceremony after a while. Yeah, go ahead, Robert. I cut you off.
That's even if you accept what the government's idea of justice is. I mean, you're talking about a one-size-fits-all solution for hundreds of millions of people who may have different ideas about what they would like their justice to be. If they were wronged, you're going into some monolithic government court and you're putting your justice in somebody else's hands, and you don't really even have a choice. When, just by happenstance of where you live, well, then your case is going to be seen in this court, and it's going to be seen by this judge. And then he's going to get to decide what happens to this defendant if found guilty. And more often than not, it's like jail time. So maybe he's off the streets for a little while. Is that any form of restitution? Is that really justice to every single person?
Or any person?
It doesn't sound like a whole lot of justice to me. It doesn't really do anything to make me whole or make me, happy or, make me sleep better at night, that knowing that some guy that murdered somebody that I love is doing some time. That doesn't really smell like justice to me. And
right.
That's
and
all you get.
At a cost that's more than sending him to Harvard.
Sure, right.
Well, yeah, 2+ years that they were in court for this, right? And that never gets taken into consideration. And I was listening to I'm sure it gets discussed like at length in all the big Ancapistan, voluntarist society like books, and I know there's all the great thinkers and Friedman, all this stuff. But I was just listening to a podcast the other day with Stefan Kinsella. I think it might have been on Dave Smith, but they were talking about like different private court systems and what they would look like, and he was a fan of like the restitution model where it was like based on money, and you wouldn't really have prison systems. I don't know what you would do with like the 1% of people in prison, give or take, that probably really should be outside of society. But he's just talking about like how being ostracized from society, which is really all what like property rights, and all this is about is living with other humans, right, in a way that is nonviolent. Is such a better system, and it would be far cheaper. You would be motivated not to have like these huge outrageous costs. And that was another thing I got touched on in the movie in the beginning, is when he rejected his lawyer, was because it's like, if you're innocent, to go through this process for years and years, or even months and months, and you're hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more if it's a really big case. That's the system we have. That's this great criminal justice system we have, that, just to defend yourself against accusations where we're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. In order to have, the judge was sort of beating him over the head in the beginning. Now, look, this is not advisable to go through this without legal counsel. And, I guess you can say, well, the government will appoint you somebody, but, there's enough stories out there about the quality of that advice, and they're basically just trying not to get themselves disbarred, and they're overwhelmed and all that. So the whole thing is just really upsetting and frustrating. Oh yeah, and then one final thing. It's not even a lot of the times like the crime is against you. Isn't it often that they view this as a crime against the state? Like if you commit murder, it's actually a crime against the state.
Yeah. Or for a lot of laws that have no victims, like, I don't know, like speeding, traffic violations. I'm just going off the top of my head, but yeah, there's so many times where it's just the state versus, you can't actually point to any kind of a victim.
Yeah, there's a great Rothbard quote where he talks about, look at how much they go after you if you commit a crime against the state versus against another private individual. The level of intensity is like so much different. And I'll post that on our show notes page, which I think we'll be putting this on the actualanarchy.com site. And then if you guys from Don't Waste Your Hate, don'twasteyourhate.com, there's a little poster behind Tony back there. If you guys want to turn this into a show or something as well, an episode, you're welcome to it, or post it on your site, whatever you guys want to do. And we'll give you an opportunity, if you want to right now, you can take it, to pimp your show, talk about your show a little bit. Because this is all about, helping each other out. We're all members of the Libertarian Union, libertarianunion.com, and all that.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, Jeff and I, we just we started the show, I guess, back in the summer now, or we just hit about 40 episodes. We've had you guys on the show in the earlier days. We got to have you guys back on again, but it's just free-form discussions, kind of ultimately just picking out the things worth hating and the things not worth hating. And most of the time, a lot of the times it ends up being the government that we're hating on, but not always. Just kind of having a lot of regular discussions about all the things going on around the world. And we had Anthony Samaroff and Tom Laird from the Scottish Liberty podcast on last time, and those guys are cool. And we had a nice conversation, found out how things are going on over in Scotland. So, if you guys are interested, check it out. don'twasteyourhate.com/39, I think. Maybe 40. I think it was 39. But that was a good one.
Yeah, close enough. Try both, people.
Yeah. Just go to don'twasteyourhate.com. It's there. But, I was thinking about the RICO thing here. I just want to go back to the trial real quick. Anybody got to get off now, or do you mind if I say something else on it?
No, I got time.
Go for it.
Yeah, no problem. I just want to give you guys a chance to pimp.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. No, the fact that they're like giving these like bulk sentences, right? It's a strange concept. To me, and I don't think it would manifest itself this way in like an Ancapistan type private property arbitration system, where they're just bringing like this loose group of people, and it's hard because you're watching a movie, you don't really know what has been left out of the movie, but there really isn't that much discussion of actual crimes that have been committed. There's a few times where they're talking about, you see, these guys met in this building, and this guy was here with his Cadillac, and this guy's here with his Lincoln, and look at these extravagant lifestyles that these guys are leading. But there wasn't much actual crime discussed. It was just kind of a weird conspiracy to commit crime, and I mean, in a just situation, people would be individually tried and individually sentenced, or they would have to give whatever restitution that they themselves, if they themselves caused damages to someone, the restitution would be on them to provide it to the victim. And it did seem strange to me that there was, like I said, very little discussion of the crime, and then they were just, aside from I think the main guy, Nick Calabrese or whatever, everybody else, or there was like 2 or 3 groups of people within the mobsters there, and it was like, okay, you guys will get 7 to 10 years. Nicky, he's going to get like 25 because he's the head of this thing. But I just found that strange, and I don't think that would manifest itself in a real private property arbitration system.
Yeah, and what is like giving you years due, really? I mean, if we're going to put you in a cage for a longer period of time, well, putting me in a cage at all is a bit of a problem. So, yeah, it's kind of bizarre. Anyway, Jeff, I know you're chomping at the bit. You want to chime in here?
No, I mean, that's so I guess the only other I was just thinking randomly. You guys might know more about some of the theories on like how a competitive criminal justice system would work, but like I was just thinking how if you're driving on the roads, and obviously the roads are not privatized, but the idea of either that you should have insurance, or if they have an ability to limit who drives on the roads, you can imagine where some companies would say, no, you need to have a certain amount of liability insurance if you're going to drive on the roads, and there's certainly plenty of areas of business where they require a certain amount of insurance. I'm in a process of trying to get married, the 18-month process of trying to just throw a 5-hour party. But they're requiring that we have liability insurance for the venue that we're renting, and it makes perfect sense. And it gives us a lot of freedom to do what we want and not have them breathing down our neck. And I almost wonder if, like you said, putting somebody in a cage wouldn't accomplish a whole lot. And it certainly is not, if they're like a real threat to society, I guess you can talk about that. But it certainly doesn't do a lot in the way of, making those that were wrong whole. I wonder if certain private like security, criminal justice arbitration companies would require that you have a certain amount of insurance, so that if you were to commit a crime and you were, liable for damages, you're not just relying on like your bank account, like you actually have an ability to pay, and then that would be one way that they would sort of compete with one another. And any insurance companies, like in many areas, would be sort of the ones that like mediate behavior, and they have actuaries who are experts at this sort of thing, and just it's fun to sometimes think through how this stuff would play out in the private system.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I think it would be similar to the Sesame credit thing in China, which sounds horrific and Orwellian because it's the state, but you can imagine in an Afghanistan situation, you would have a reputation score, and people would know based on this score whether to trust you or not, whether they want to like work with you, deal with you, sell to you, buy from you, all of those things. And I think you're right, there would be an insurance model, and that insurance model would be focused on prevention and facilitation, and then finally restitution downstream. But I think that they would be more akin to preventing things from happening, sort of like, with fire insurance. They'll get you to reduce the rate if you have a fire extinguisher in the house, home smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector, fire-resistant materials. You have like what they call the FireWise. Robert actually just went to this fire presentation by the government. But like if you have a way to put out a fire and like a certain perimeter around your property, that your rates would be lower, so you'd be incentivized financially to comply with, best practices type things that evolve in the marketplace. And I think that would be a far better system because you'd actually incentivize more proper behavior, but it would be in a decentralized fashion and not in a top-down totalitarian fashion, even though on the surface it might appear very similar. Like people would know that you're a good dude or a bad dude.
Oh yeah, and it might be very difficult to participate in like the like the more fun or like just to get basic necessities or whatever to participate in society. If you have like a horrific record, you can imagine insurance companies would penalize people much more for like say violent crimes versus other things that are on their sort of their rap sheet. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can almost imagine like how like eBay or something works. I mean, I've bought things on eBay that it seems like kind of risky, but you look at somebody's profile and it's like, oh, they got like 4.9 stars from 10,000 customers. Like this account's reputation is worth a lot to them, and it's well earned, and so the trust comes from that.
Right, yeah, you see that on Amazon, you see that on Airbnb, Uber, all of those things. A reputation score really matters. And then there's also plenty of dispute resolution that happens like with credit cards. They'll absolve you of risk in fraud. Like if somebody commits a fraud against you, they'll go after them for you and give you back the money. So that kind of thing happens all the time. And that's fairly private. I mean, I know that they're a financial entity and there's so many regulations on financial entities, almost as much as on the medical industry, and that just drives up the cost and all of that. But anyway, I wanted to ask you guys, since you both listened to our show, and it's episode 73, in case anyone's listening, actualanarchy.com/73, was there anything that you considered amiss on our part, like we're wrong about, or that we didn't bring up that we should have? And I'll go to Tony.
Well, I was kind of thinking, I was wondering what you guys thought about the judge, because I don't think you discussed him at all. And I didn't hate him, actually. I thought he was like a fairly decent judge. And I mean, I think in that private property society that we're pontificating over, you're going to need judges or arbitrators or people who kind of play that kind of a role, whether they're the sole judge or they're part of like some kind of tribunal with multiple judges. I mean, obviously there's many ways it could work, but I don't know. I guess I just want to make the point that I think there are people who are decent in the system, but that's the system that's fucked. But I can imagine like that guy being a pretty good benefit to society if he was a private arbitrator, because I don't think he was too bad of a judge. But I didn't hear you guys discuss that. What are your guys' thoughts on him?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. In the private property situation, you'd absolutely need some sort of a judge. But in that situation, you have them operating on their own reputations, and they're competing with other judges and their reputations. And whether or not you hire them or not, you're going to be based on that. Whereas with this guy, he just gets thrown the case. And if he's a shitty judge, oh well, tough luck. Maybe he'll get recused. He'll recuse himself if he has a conflict of interest, but otherwise, that's what you get. And if he's corrupt, is he working with the prosecution? Is he working with some other interest? You don't know. Or even if you do know, what can you do about it?
Well, I mean, there is a bit of a vetting process with judges. I mean, they get voted on, I think, and they have to be lawyers. And yeah, I mean, it's a political bureaucratic
it's an elected
method.
Position, right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with the election system in this country that I know of. So
well, it's the Russians.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sure it's perfectly fine. I mean, especially once you're elected, I know the idea of the Supreme Court is like you're elected for life, and so then you're immune to any kind of special interest, right? You're set for life. But what if they're bad? What if they're bad? What if they're terrible? They don't go by any kind of reputation. There's no vetting process after that. At that point, there's no market mechanism to correct for bad actors. So maybe this guy was good. But another problem I have is that all this guy's authority stems from the state, stems from violence, stems from coercion. And the fact that somebody, makes him angry and he steals $50,000 from him or $10,000 or whatever it was. He's just like, well, I'll just fine you in contempt. You owe me $20,000. Yeah, because you made me angry. You're going to be a little pissy little bitch. And so you're going to demand money from me. You're going to rob me because I didn't respect your station or whatever. Go fuck yourself.
That's true. I forgot about that part. You're right about that. Yeah, fuck that guy. No, I will. I did write in my notes when I didn't write too many notes when I was watching this movie, but one thing I did write, which goes right back to that part of the movie, was I enjoyed the total disrespect to the court that Jackie kind of showed. You know, he kind of just walked up there like he was doing a stand-up comedy bit, and he didn't care at all. He wasn't showing it any respect. I mean, he did, like you did mention in the show that you guys recorded, that eventually he did kind of bitch out and kiss the ring of the judge. But it was I did enjoy the in the beginning how, like, you know, he seemed to not give a fuck, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And that was the thing that really upset him, though. Like, showing any contempt for the court, disrespect for the court, is the thing that really bothers him, because that's like the closely held faith-based belief that they have. Yeah. So we did talk about a little bit of the religious aspect to it. I think it was just in kind of passing. Though I do agree that the judge himself was probably a decent guy, trying to do the right thing. I mean, he wasn't like super rude to Jackie, especially when his mom died. Is that what happened? His mom died?
Yeah, his mom died. It was the other judge from like his district or whatever that I guess wouldn't ultimately allow him to go to the funeral. This judge seemed to want to be able to do it. It just wasn't in his control, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And there was that other scene where he wanted to give everybody a fair shake. Every defendant got a fair shake in his court when the guy was like sick, and they wanted to push on without him. Right, the guy that ended up getting put in like a bed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course. This all begs the question of whether or not that makes his character realistic or not.
Fair enough.
Like,
I mean, it allegedly happened, so, you know.
Well, I mean, so like sometimes the judges will, and actually this came up where he was worried about like mistrials, right? You know, and like appeals and things like that, and they want it to stick, even if they want these guys to go to jail. They want to make sure that they follow all the rules so that they stay in jail. But yeah, I found that one scene which was sort of going above and beyond when Jackie's mother died, where I thought he was bringing him in to sort of to bait him. You know, that's the way they kind of portrayed it when he called him into his chambers, and you know, and he offered him the drink, and I was waiting for like the hammer to come down, and then it was this really sincere, is there anything I can do for you? And I mean, who knows? I've thankfully never been in that situation, but that felt like a bit of you know, Hollywood drama there.
Yeah, and it was a bit of a callback to the original meeting that when they brought Jackie out of jail and into meeting with the prosecutor, and they gave him this nice breakfast. They're pouring wine for him and all this stuff, and then they were just using that to like butter him up and then get him to flip, and he wouldn't do it. His answer was "fuck you," and then the one guy tossed his little tray over, and it seemed like a very similar setup to that, because we don't know at that point that Jackie's mother had died. So, you know, we think the judge is potentially going to, you know, try to butter him up for something and whatnot, but he actually is being sincere in it, and that was kind of nice. I mean, I didn't hate the judge. I hate the whole RICO and the whole facade of a justice system and the religious aspects to it, but I think he was being endearing in that moment there. I don't think he was like a terrible guy. He was just doing terrible things, which I know sounds weird, but, you know, it's kind of how things happen, right? Like everyone, like I mentioned in the show, everyone thinks they're wearing the white hat, right? No one thinks they're doing like terrible things. I mean, sure, there's some psychos out there, but for the most part, everyone thinks they're doing the right thing. But as Robert said earlier in this Boys Night Out, the worst atrocities are carried out by people just following orders and thinking they're doing the right thing.
Hey, we're the same humans that were around 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. You know, we're really not that different as far as like biological creatures go. What has changed, I would argue, is culture, society, and just sort of like growing in that sense. And so, yeah, you can put otherwise probably, you know, decent people. I've maybe changed my own views on what that even means, because I think you could take the same human and run their life out in a bunch of different scenarios and a bunch of different environments, and they would be capable of very, very different things. So yeah, is this like a decent guy in a bad system? Maybe. How much does that matter? I tend to think over as I get older, I don't know if it's just bitterness, but but less and less. But yeah, they did make his character in the movie pretty endearing. Whether or not that was realistic, I don't know. We might have to do research on that, but he was probably the most likable character if you actually take into account all the things about the gangster characters.
Yeah.
And the Nick guy, he seemed to be like a total prick the whole time, right?
Yeah, that was his entire character.
Just a douchebag.
Yeah, which I think was just there to like create the the desire for Jackie to flip on the guy.
Yeah,
because
or the sympathy for him at least.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Nick would actually have done that in real life, because if all it takes is for him to piss off Jackie enough, then Nick's in jail for the rest of his life. So I think he has a very high incentive to not be an asshole to Jackie in real life.
Unless deep down he really knows that Jackie is not going to flip. Like his whole "I love you guys," the loyalty thing was. I mean, even though he was making fun of it, he must have at some level known that it was the truth of Jackie. Otherwise, you wouldn't want to piss him off. You're right. You wouldn't want to shit on him all the time.
And what about when he says, there's that little scene where he says, you're a fucking prick. He says to Nick, if Nick is supposed to be like the mob boss, I don't care what's going on. I don't know if I've ever seen in a movie portraying these situations where anyone has really done that to. Imagine doing that to the Godfather. Even if he is being a prick,
Right, and even if you're in jail, because they can get you in jail too, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and actually, I don't know if this is well known, but the guy this is based on, the real Jackie, while this film was being made, he died. And he had been released from prison just a couple of years prior, and then he got cancer or something and ended up dying. But he had reconciled with his wife, I guess, which was, nice and all that. But anyway, just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. I think they flashed that across the screen at the end. Speaking of the end, I wanted to bring up Tyrion Lannister's closing statement. Was pretty interesting, and I think it was something to the effect of, this government, basically they want to put these guys down, put these mobsters down because they don't like the neighborhood they come from, they don't like the way they talk, they don't like their traditions, they don't like their beliefs, basically something to that effect. And I don't know if you guys follow Thad Russell. I know Jeff does, so maybe Jeff could comment. I was just making me think about this, the United States government, very Protestant, all the people running shit, super Protestant, and then you have these swarthy Italian Catholics coming in. And I wonder if there's I would wonder what Thad would say about this, because I think he'd probably have some historical context to that kind of, I guess, battle between those two factions. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, Thad tends to have some very long, drawn-out, view that tends to infuriate 90% of the people listening to him on all this stuff. So I'm sure he would. But yeah, I have no thoughts there really.
Yeah, well, maybe we should have more thoughts on that, because I know that if we tag the episode with him in it, he might see it. He apparently has some kind of scraping software that picks up anything that's mentioned with his name, and then he'll sometimes respond and then interview the guys who were talking about him.
Wow. You know what? That makes me feel bad then, because I had a whole rant written down ready to go to rip him apart. I was going to do a one-off video of it, and I never did it. And actually, I'm sure he hasn't come off the majority of his postmodernist views, so maybe I should do it anyway now that I know that.
Yeah, dude, if you have something really significant that you want to this is our Thad rebuttal episode, and then you tag him in it, he will likely hear about it and then respond and then interview you guys. So I think that would be great. I mean, you got to be fucking prepared for that, dude.
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah, we have a lot of off mic conversations about that. So.
Well, I'll just say this: he's really intellectual, really smart, but he's really wrong about some stuff, and you have to be very precise in what you say in response to him. So if you guys really nail it down, I mean, you could really pin him, I think. I mean, because he is wrong on a lot of stuff.
I feel like you're leading us into a trap here. You guys,
it's a trap.
You got it. I think you
guys got it. You do it. Do it.
Just make sure you're prepped. Make sure you're prepped.
We'll get the popcorn going. Don't mention our name. Have fun.
I'm not going to do it. Fuck no.
I'm not ready for that, man. No thanks.
No, but I saw, I forget who it was, but it was a smallish podcast that only done like 50 episodes, and Thad saw it. It popped up on his phone or something, and he watched it, and then he contacted the guys, and he's like, "All right, let's have a conversation." And they tried. They did okay, but I don't think they really nailed him down. I think that he's one of those guys who ducks for cover in the language of what you're, like the precision of how you say something, and he kind of takes the not the intention of what you're asking, but well, you literally said this, therefore I'm gonna focus on what you literally said and not what you're trying to elaborate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and look, the fact that he, one of the most frustrating of many frustrating interviews I've seen with him, and I really do like that, and some of the interviews that he's done on his show and some other ones are some of my all-time favorite podcasts. And it's also forced me to think a lot about my own views on these things, and I've ultimately come to a position that is in opposition to him, but it took him sort of like stimulating that part of my mind. So all good stuff here, and I think he's probably a real force for good, and he's taken on like a really evil education system and all that stuff. But the fact that he was able to have a quote debate with Stefan Molyneux about postmodernism, and Molyneux really couldn't nail him, even though I thought Molyneux didn't perform all that well. I think says something, because this is what Molyneux does. Like, I mean, he's as prolific as they come, right? And he's big on philosophy and just these thought games and stuff. And he did not make a compelling argument, even like to me, never mind to Thad. Countering a lot of those basic postmodernist ideas.
Yeah, Steph's very hit or miss, at least in the past. I mean, he's all right. So they're going to sound shitty. This is the shit on everyone I'm a fan of right now. Even Tom Woods, I love the guy, and he's changed a bit in recent years, but he's always seemed a bit milquetoast in a way, even though he shreds the 3x5 card and all this stuff. But I'm like, go for the jugular, man. you know this stuff. You're like super genius level smart and a history dude, and you know the answers to all these things. But he's so humble, and I think he holds back. And it's I just want to see Tom Woods unleashed. Is what I want to see. I want to see him go Ultimate Warrior.
Well, you don't see him.
He gets pretty savage on Twitter.
Yeah, that's true. You don't see him in too many debates, though. I mean, the problem is most of the audio you're hearing from Woods is like a cordial interview on his own show. You don't get him really thrashing someone in any type of war of words, because I don't know. I haven't heard him in one of those in a while.
Trash Ron Paul in his presence, and then you might get him a little fired up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when Molyneux was talking to Thad, I mean, Molyneux was just all emotion. I mean, Molyneux is so dramatic. I mean, I love the guy, but he was super dramatic, and
so Thad. They're the two most dramatic people I could think of.
Yeah, but Molyneux is like dramatic in a theatrical sense. Like, you know what I'm saying?
He was like a theater major or some shit.
Yeah. And so he was like super like dramatic in that way, like big hand motions, like a lot of like hand wringing and stuff like that. So I don't think it played well when he spoke to Thad on that. I don't know. My question for Thad would really be like, I'm not really convinced. Like he'll explain all his postmodern shit, and a lot of times I'm like shaking my head like, yeah, I got you. Yeah, you're right. That makes sense. Okay, maybe it's all subjective, maybe whatever it is, right? But at the end of the whole thing, and I've said this to you before, Jeff, my question would be, all right, so even if I grant you all that, what's your fucking point? That's kind of where I stop with Thad, because I want him to take the next step and try to explain why it's so important that he holds these views and that he's like a postmodernist, an unabashed postmodernist. He doesn't convince me that it's worth thinking about too much, you know?
Yeah, there's a lack of. This is going to sound worse than I mean it to be, or like more of an accusation. But there's a lack of sincerity. I think I don't even know if it's conscious, but he'll make one defense like, "Oh no, I don't mean anything by it, other than like in and of itself, we don't know anything, and here are the postmodernist principles." When you're coming at him on like certain ideas, but then you say something else. And is really frustrating. He'll have someone on that I really like Alex Epstein or something, and they'll be, they'll make one sentence. And whoa, hold on, is that a universal moral claim? Are you making a universal moral claim for all people at all times?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. He doesn't get to the what your intention is.
Yeah,
he stops, early on and like, oh, you didn't precisely say it the exact right way, and I'm going to parse your language, and it's like fucking bullshit.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys. How about this? I have like paragraphs written about this shit as a rebuttal, and this is kind of motivating me to go back to that and clean it up. If you're interested at all, maybe we could circulate the language. You could see if nothing else for my own benefit, if you guys think that it's a decent counterpoint to him and something worth recording, I'd be interested. Since you guys seem to have thought about this a decent amount and listened to his arguments, if you think that there's any obvious holes in it, because I would hate to present something out there that he's already like addressed. And I just never happened to come across.
Well, here's the thing, and this is going to sound shady, but I don't think he actually addresses it. I think he uses the "you didn't say it precisely" as a defense towards getting deeper into the conversation.
But what do you think his motivation is?
To appear intellectual and be smarter than you.
So you think he's a charlatan?
Well, I'm not saying he's a charlatan. I'm saying that he's using it as a defense to like shut you down before you get to the point. It's a way to win. It's a way to win the debate on a technical win. It's not like you're actually exploring the topic. You know what I mean? Like Patrick McFarlane of Liberty Weekly, he took in sort of sidebar conversations with me and I think other people in the Libertarian Union about how Thad's position on, I think, Thomas Jefferson or something is like totally off base and ridiculous and totally, against whatever Jefferson wrote or something like that. And we'd have to ask him for the actual argument because I don't quite recall it. But it's like one of those things where he's definitely wrong about something, but he doesn't get deep enough into it in his conversations or in his debates to get to that point because he'll try to shut you down way early on how you imprecisely said something. If you follow what I'm ranting.
Yeah, no, and I thought Robert was going to jump in with something there, but
yeah.
Well, I don't know much about Thaddeus, so I haven't really said anything in this part of the discussion. But I do know that if he's a postmodernist, and I know Jordan Peterson smacks down postmodernism pretty well. Does he talk about one or the other, or have they debated or anything like that?
Yeah.
Well, so Thad. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
No, you go. You had something.
I was just going to say Thad has challenged Peterson like publicly several times to debate him on postmodernism, and also Thad has challenged Sam Harris to debate on certain things as well.
Oh God, he's terrible too.
yeah. And but I know Peterson hasn't accepted it, as far as I can tell. I mean, this was like 6 months ago, I think.
That's surprising because he seems to be like, yeah, if anyone talks shit about me, I'll talk to him, I'll debate him. Like he seems to be.
And I thought it was the other way around. I thought that Thad was not all that enthusiastic because I've heard it brought up to him, and he had reservations, at least in the comments that I heard, about talking to Peterson for various reasons. But that's interesting. I would hope that Jordan is just maybe so busy right now, and you just want to Bill Maher, and maybe he feels like he needs to sort of get through like the book tour, and then he can get back to some of the more theoretical stuff. But that seems like it's well overdue. But I also, like, if you saw the first time that him and Sam Harris did Waking Up, Sam Harris's podcast, it was an unbelievably frustrating conversation that they had to come back and revisit and basically just table certain concepts. And this is where, with that, I'm torn, because in one sense, you're right. I think he does what you say, which is like, and I appreciate it too for people that have sort of committed their entire careers to one thought process and like I might be in trouble here. And so you sort of, I think it could be an instinct to sort of fall back on some technical points in order to like squirm out of it, in order to get a win. But I also appreciate, as most libertarians do, the importance of having like first principles in order. And that, well, no, I know this seems pedantic, but actually this has really strong implications down the line when we're talking about things, and we should get it sorted out now. And so I'm kind of torn about how I feel about those things. And just to go, finally back to your point, Tony, what's the point? All right, fine. Let's say I don't, but let's say I grant you all this bullshit that you're talking about, and I just put a qualifier on the end of everything I say about whatever the topic is, like I believe, or is my interpretation, or whatever. Does that change anything? And if not, why are we doing this? So it's kind of like personally, I'm still in somebody's issues, like all over the place with how I view it.
No, that's really good stuff, and it's weird. And I've asked Robert this, like, where do these guys come from? Because they're like well known as being intellectual types, but they're so wrong about certain things. And here we are, just guys like doing our own podcasts and whatnot, and we can sort of critique it in a way, or just know that it's not quite right, it doesn't quite jive, but it's really hard to pin down. And I don't know what it is, because I don't feel like I'm the smartest guy in the world, or even in the room here. But like, how do they miss a lot of these things? Like, we're built upon like the intellectuals of the past, right? Like certain bodies of thought, schools of thought that have built up over time. And I mean, if you really look back at history, there are so many people who advanced thought, but they were wrong about so many things. And then someone else came along and like refined it or improved upon it, corrected it. And then, I don't know if you guys are like, I believe you guys are kind of Rothbardian types, right? It feels like, I still disagree with Rothbard on a couple of things, maybe a half dozen things. But he gets the basics right, I think, like up to a very, very, high level of, it takes like, in the levels of hell, the Dante's like Inferno shit. I'm like on level 7 or 8 with him until I start to divert, like with the children's rights and the abortion stuff and all that stuff. But
IP.
Yeah, I'm almost with him on some of the IP, because he's against patents, but he's okay with copyrights. I'm kind of okay with that as long as it's a contractual obligation with the purchaser. Like, you buy certain rights for something, and as long as you can enforce it without a monopoly of violence with the government, then it's kind of okay. So that's kind of where I'm at that. But I don't know. At the risk of sounding like I think I'm the smartest person ever, I feel weird critiquing these guys who are well known as being like super smart guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just a fucking guy in like a 20 by 8 steel box, talking to you guys.
Yeah, it is weird, but at our episode 37, don'twasteyourhate.com/37, we had Trey Weaver on of the Subversion webcast.
I love that guy. He's awesome.
And Trey and I, we shit on Sam Harris for like an hour and a half. So, I mean, sometimes you just got to do it. It was fun. I mean, I don't know if I was right or not, but I mean, I find Harris to be like very cool sometimes, and like so frustrating that I want to like throw him out a window other times. It's crazy.
I think it was Rothbard that said it about Friedman, where he said it's kind of unfortunate that so many great thinkers focus so much of their energy in what ends up being like their their area of weakness.
Yeah,
So
their worst thing, like him
their
on
worst-
monetary theory or
That's
something.
exactly what he was talking about. Yes, monetary theory and the whole Chicago school stuff. You know what? So you could view it so many different ways, and yeah, you definitely want to be humble and like, who the fuck am I to like talk about? I mean, give me a break. At the same time, if you have clear thinking, I mean, they're swimming in their own water all day long, right? And they're making so many massive contributions to various theories, and they're going to be wrong sometimes. And you hope that these guys have like their own sort of checks and balances in place. Maybe it's a good thing. Again, Thad is a polarizing figure for this reason. He seems to, I don't know if it's insecurity that he goes combing the internet from when his name pops up, to challenge ideas, or if he considers it just being like intellectually honest and trying to like harden his ideas. I could see elements of both. The fact that he still holds some ideas, like just the very way that he talks about libertarianism, where it's like, come on, man, you can't possibly think that that's what libertarians hold and that's their viewpoint. Like, given that you're surrounded by them and like so many of your friends are radical libertarians and yet you don't even have the basics down, or you're just being like a dick, and you're like deliberately misrepresenting them because of some like weird personal thing, which definitely, I mean, he's a Freud guy anyway, but it's pretty clear that his upbringing comes through in his work quite a bit. So I don't know. That's a rambling thought, but
no, that's my bread and butter is rambling thoughts. And I also have beef with Peterson, as much as I love him, and all of these guys advance thought for sure. And I don't want to like begrudge them for that, but I think that I can critique them in my own mind in a lot of ways. But go ahead, Robert.
Well, I was just going to ask a question. I mean, is this Thaddeus Russell person? Is he a statist? Is he like a conservative or a liberal, or what is he?
He's he's an anarchist, I would say. Definitely an anti-statist. I mean, he came up as like a pretty crazy socialist. West Coast, grew up in Berkeley, I think. His parents were like card-carrying like revolutionaries, like they
communists, big time.
Communists who infiltrated, who left like the cushy lifestyle of academia and literally, took like truck driving jobs and factory jobs with the with the intention of organizing the proletariat.
Vive la revolution!
Yeah, for real. So I mean,
hardcore.
So yeah, he came from that, and he basically eventually, I guess, realized just that the economics were bullshit, right, Jeff?
Yeah, well, so he wrote, he was in academia at like Ivy League schools for decades and decades, and that's part of the reason that he's so valuable, because, and it's like Jordan Peterson, where it's like he's coming from the inside and he dug his way out, and so I don't begrudge him for bringing his upbringing with him. I mean, how many of us can say that we came up in an environment like that and then we found some truth and moved to the total opposite of it and then like commit their lives to, he's a total outcast in academia now. But he started his own university called Renegade University. Scott Horton, I think, was his first adjunct professor. He's got a really important book that came out years and years ago that's very influential now, Renegade History of the United States, and the whole theory being like it's the like the underclass and like the
those on the fringes
of culture that end up moving the middle. So he talks a lot about...
Oh, that's us for sure.
Yeah,
that's good news.
About like sex workers and all this stuff and how like down... So it's just a whole different perspective on those types of movements.
So wait, so what are his economics? Is he like a Marxist?
No, I think... and Casella, you can chime. I think he basically admits ignorance. Like he was talking to Dave Smith recently, and Smith mentioned walking around New York and what infuriated him the most. And like the Federal Reserve came up, and Thad just joked and said, "Yeah, you libertarian guys, you really have it out for the Fed." He's like, "I'm sure I would too." He's like, I just got to do more of my homework and research on that before I can like get fired up enough about it. So I think it's just one of those things where there's just some people that the economics, like, it bores them and it's not their area and they never get into it. So I think he's like kind of in that camp, but he's definitely not statist. But he also doesn't believe in any kind of morality. Like, he doesn't believe that morals exist and that they're all
He
bullshit.
sounds like a nihilist, honestly, and that doesn't really jive with being an anarchist, really.
Yeah, I think he probably is a big admirer of Nietzsche.
Hmm.
Don't most nihilists like misunderstand Nietzsche, though? I mean, isn't that like kind of their thing, is to like misinterpret what he's saying and take it the wrong way and run with it?
You mean like Hans Hermann Hoppe and the alt-right?
Yes, exactly like that. I mean, Hoppe, I love Hoppe. He's like the most. He's very precise in his language. Speaking of precise language, but people will take what he's saying and then run with it totally in dangerous and stupid areas. You know, and I still disagree with Hoppe on a couple of things, and I consider him to be Rothbard's heir apparent. I mean, you know, they worked together, and I think Hoppe advanced thought beyond what Rothbard was talking about. I don't necessarily agree with his prescriptions. He talked about in his property. What's it's a Property and Freedom Society, PFS. Yeah, his speech in Turkey last week, where like he had the what must be done, like the 10 things, and not the what must be done from 10 years ago, where he talked about getting involved in local elections and things like that. But this was talking about not permitting as much immigration and things like that, like removing degenerates in some way. But it's all like there's so much nuance to what he's saying that if you don't pick up on the nuance, then you essentially become this totalitarian. Like I think that's how like a Cantwell type or a Rachel's type will take it, or the alt-right will take it. Are you guys picking up what I'm putting down? Am I just spouting nonsense here?
Well, and I think this came up early in one of our first conversations with you, where it was kind of apparent that Tony and I were maybe at a slight disagreement with the whole group actually on the immigration issue, which is one of the big fun ones. And so, without being an expert on that, yeah, it sounds like maybe he is says that there's something to at least the cultural aspect of it, and then I would guess not having control of the borders, and then there's this whole debate I think within libertarians. I think about it all the time. Like, do you try to approximate what the market would do in the absence of one that is functioning, or do you just sort of allow all freedom regardless of the other interventions that exist? And yeah, I could see how some people that already have their mind made up on certain elements would say, oh, ethno-state, that's what you're going for here. Ethno-state, gotcha. Okay, we want an ethno-state. And by the way, we're going to ignore everything you said about how we would go about accomplishing that.
Yeah, I don't know Hoppe too well. Although I did listen to one of his speeches where he was saying we need to learn from the alt-right and Richard Spencer on the culture issue. So he is a little bit far right with that culture shit, which can be very off-putting to someone, especially someone who doesn't know all of the other work that he's done. I mean, it is true. You have to kind of look at Hoppe with like some kind of a nuanced lens in order to not take it like some pretty dangerous way. So, but like I said, I don't really know too much Hoppe beyond. I know a little bit about the argumentation ethics, which is pretty cool shit. But other than that, I haven't read much Hoppe.
He's a great writer, and he's a very good read. Very precise in his thinking and his writing. I just sent you, actually, it was Rollo McFlugel, and I think that's like a stage name. But that was their podcast, and I just sent that to you, Tony, the episode where Thaddeus Russell had heard them talking about him and then got on their show shortly thereafter. It was in March, and it's pretty interesting stuff. And if you guys are interested, I think Patrick's comments might be in the Libertarian Union chat on Facebook, and you can search our chat within the chat. So you could put in like Thad's name and then find what Patrick had said about him, or like what his critique of his position, I think on Jefferson might have been. And weren't we talking about Find Me a Guilty like an hour ago?
Yeah, what happened to that?
That was a while ago.
But this is good stuff, and that's the beauty of having guests, and why it made it so fucking difficult to edit shows was because we just go off on these tangents, and I love it. And that's the part I miss, because when we made the change to the show, yeah, our show is tighter, and it's like an hour long, and it's just Robert and I bouncing back and forth, and we have a good rapport. But we miss the, having other people's perspectives and the rabbit trails that we go on, and that's one of the beauties of doing this Boys Night Out stuff. So thank you guys so much for doing this. And I know it's super late for you guys, so not that I'm like trying to wind this down, but I know we've been on for like 2 hours now, and if you guys are still game for going a little longer, I'm game for it too.
Yeah, Tony and our style is I think to just start rambling on topics, and then we go for however long it's sort of going, and we say, all right, well, how many episodes do you think we could squeeze out of that? And then it's the unfortunate jobs whoever's editing that episode, which is usually him, if I'm being honest, to sort of like make something out of it, and like arbitrarily draw a line and just sort of fade out the conversation and bring it back for the next one. So yeah, what your format, no doubt, is probably more easily consumed. But it's these sorts of conversations are fun, and they're natural. And if you're into this shit, then they could be fun to listen to.
Yeah, I had no idea that you guys broke up like long form conversations into individual shows. That's pretty awesome. I've always considered mining some of our prior stuff and being like, oh, I could make something like out of these 3 bits and turn that into something, but it's like so much fucking work.
Yeah, lately we haven't done it like
respect.
that. We haven't done it like that lately because we've been kind of recording remotely a lot in the past like 5 or so episodes. But the ones where we actually get together, it ends up being like a 3-hour marathon. So we generally cut it up into 2 or 3 at least. But yeah, that process is terrible, and I hate doing it. But
man, that was the whole premise of our change. It was like I want to get us to not have to edit. So now it's just Robert, it's you and me, and we're gonna start here, and we're gonna go about an hour, and I'm gonna warn you when we're close to that, and then we're gonna be done. And then you guys are probably familiar, but we also have the Last Nighters version of the show because Anarchy has a stink to it and whatever. So we want to have a broader appeal. So we'll start talking to our actual Anarchy audience, and then we'll go into normie mode. And then we'll do the movie conversation, and then we'll wind that down and end the Last Nighters, and then we'll chat a little bit more actual Anarchy style. And even beyond that, we still have like pre-show and post-show, and that's all our Patreon stuff. And a handful of people get into that. But like that really made a huge difference in our time commitment to, like, before when we had guests and we would just do freeform and I would have to piece things together, it was like 10 hours of editing. It was ridiculous. And now it's just like we watch the movie, we take a few notes, Robert and I talk for about an hour, done. I mean, I just literally chop it up a little bit just to get the pre-show separate from the post-show, Kathleen Turner Overdrive, and Last Nighters from the actual Anarchy stuff. And it's so much easier. It's amazing. I don't know if like we haven't seen the numbers really change, which is a bit of a. We thought it would make a big difference, and it's just been like the same trajectory as before, but it's easier to do. So bang for the buck. It's sort of effective, but it's not like giving us bigger numbers. You know what I mean? Like I'm glad we're doing it because I work a lot less on the show. So I don't know if this is helpful to you guys at all, but like it sounds like what you're doing right now is like, or had done, is super painful. So I don't know.
And part of it with us was we were starting out with no experience doing something like this, and so the first easily first dozen episodes, we found that we needed to chop out whole sections just because they were embarrassing and not great to listen to, and we're stammering and losing our thoughts, and then the technology would bail out on us, and there was an echo, and so you're sort of working through that in real time, and you're just like, fuck it, we'll just record and try to make something of it. And at least in the beginning, you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm spending a ton of time on this, but you know what, I'm learning some important things that I didn't know about, like on the job, But that's hey, look, and that other format that you created, I would imagine there's a lot of shows that are successful where, they were sort of off and running for a while in a particular format, and things were kind of steady, and then for whatever reason they had a big bump, and then things took off. And then the fact that you have that archive for people to go back to is great for any time that you have new fans that come on. But I do have one question though about the Last Nighters.
Okay, go for it.
I want to know who came up with the Strokes intro, the Nintendo sounding Strokes intro.
Oh yeah, so that was me. The Last Nighters is an homage to Ray Rothbard. He did movie reviews, and he hated Star Wars, by the way. But his stage name, or his nom de plume, I think is what they say, was Mr. First Nighter. But since Robert and I live in remote-ish areas, we can't go see movies first release, and so we talk about movies that are older, and been out for a while. So we thought, okay, we'll take the Mr. First Nighter and do a bit of a play on that, and we're the Last Nighters. And then that name just connoted to me, the Strokes last night. And I really enjoyed that song, and I like those guys. But I wanted to use their music, but I had to search for music that was not copyrighted. So I found a version of it, and there's a few different ones that are like covers and whatnot, but this one was like a Nintendo 8-bit version, like on the Game Boy or some shit. I'm like, hey, that's cool, I'll just grab that. It doesn't have a copyright on it, and it kind of works, and sounds like it stood out to you guys, so that's good. Hopefully it's like been an effective use of the little 15 seconds of the music.
Yeah, we're big Strokes fans here. We're the right age for it, so
the phrasing.
Appealing to us. Oh, what do you mean?
Exactly. Oh man, there was something else I wanted to say before we get into the Strokes. God damn it, what is it? Don't quite recall. Robert, you got anything?
All I know is that the Strokes music is cool, but it makes it sound like we're a video game show, and we're not. But it's still good. I dig it.
Yeah. I want to ask your guys' opinion. Do you think that us demarking the show that way is like a good thing, bad thing? Because, like I said, we haven't really seen a difference in the numbers. So I'm like, was it worth doing? And should we change back? Bring guests back on? And should I suffer the 10 hours of editing, or did we make a good move? What do you think?
I mean, I would say it seems like a good move to me. Just to give yourself some breathing room. I mean, I imagine you're not making millions of dollars off of the podcast, so I mean, to spend that much time editing is not a fun thing, right? So, and I think the format makes it easier to consume for for someone who's actually I'm sure you have a lot of fans that are just people that you have seen you in the Facebook groups and kind of, okay, like I want to follow any libertarian podcast I can, but, making it something you can consume as just maybe a movie fan, not an anarchy fan. I mean, I think that's a good idea. I would say at least keep it going for a little while, see how it pans out. You've only been doing it for a couple of months now, a month or two?
Yeah, we started at the new year, so episode 58, which was Get Out, and now we're on 73. So it's been, the last 15 or so. Whatever that math is, I haven't been in school in a while. One thing I probably can do that's different is, so far Last Nighters is only on a website and YouTube. It's not in iTunes, and I could probably add that to what I'm doing and make it a little easier for people to consume it that way.
We definitely have more listeners on audio right now.
Yeah, I would think that that's essential. Yeah.
What about your actual anarchy stuff? Do you guys get more listeners on YouTube or in Podomatic or whatever?
Oh, definitely podcasts. Yeah, for sure. My biggest YouTube account is actually a Read Rothbard account because it's all like Rothbard lectures. So the content's like actually primo.
Yeah.
Even though the audio quality's not great, but the stuff the guy's talking about is really good. But yeah, I've been toying with the idea of getting the Last Nighters into its own podcast feed, and I think that just your short comments here, like it's essential. Yeah, I think I'll do that.
Well, you're trying to, I don't want to say trick people, but kind of trick people, right? Like this is like just like a couple of guys talking about movies, and if you happen to work in some subliminal messaging along the way, then fantastic.
Oh, it's very overt. I mean, we haven't
not
changed,
every
like,
time.
the content.
Yeah, there was some overt anarchy in the Find Me Guilty episode for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's
when the movie lends to it, yeah, absolutely. And then the Super Troopers, yeah, and the Find Me Guilty.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Some episodes go by, entire episodes go by without us even kind of mentioning any kind of liberty stuff.
That's true.
But do you guys find that your audience for that podcast, are they coming over from actual anarchy, or are these new people that are not coming from like the libertarian sphere, or do you not know?
So the audience for Last Nighters is pretty small. I mean, we've got 66 subscribers, and 40 of them came from a Facebook post I made that was like, hey, we're not able to load videos to this channel, and we think it's because we don't have enough subscribers. So a bunch of people subscribe to it. I don't know if they're listening. So I don't know how much traction it's been getting, but I think that if we had a podcast feed for it, I think it would help. And one of the things we do in the actual anarchy portion of the show is we talk about why we do the Last Nighters version. I think you guys heard that in the Find Me Guilty. And in a way, we view it as we're sort of giving our actual anarchy audience a bit of like inside baseball kind of talk. You know, like, hey guys, you know, just for you, we're talking about like behind the scenes shit. Like, here's why we do this and this and this. And now we're getting into that version, and it's a way that you guys can share it with people that you don't, you know, want to scare with the name anarchy, but you want to give them some of these ideas and this analysis of the movie. And one of the things I said to Robert back when we first came up with this idea is, I don't want to change what we say when we're talking about the movies. I just want us to like have a line where we say, okay, now we're doing the Last Nighters version, but we're going to say the same shit. And I think we've been pretty true to that. I mean, wouldn't you say, Robert? Like, we haven't really changed what we say. It's just we don't have anarchy in the name.
Yeah, I don't. I try not to censor myself at all, and I think I'm pretty successful with that. I can't think of a single time where I thought we're doing Last Nighters, I shouldn't say this. That just never happens.
Do you guys do you guys find that so I don't know very much about like the copywriting and stuff, and we don't have the viewership to where I feel like if we've made mistakes, like we would have been burned yet. But if you wanted to like insert a clip from a movie, are there like Creative Commons or something like that allow you to do that, or would that be like a big no-no?
Oh, you definitely get nailed with some stuff. We used to put clips of the movies into our show, and then we kept getting tagged with, some music artist claims that this is part of their song, even though it was like a direct clip from a movie, because they borrowed that clip from the movie into their song. It was like totally fucked up.
Yeah, it is fair use, though. It is absolutely fair use, and YouTube critics I think they like constantly have to deal with demonetization claims all the time and strikes against their channel all the time.
Because if you're commenting on it, it's supposed to be fair use, right? But then YouTube can just be like, well, we're going to strike you anyway. Or, at the end of the day, they may end up like reviewing your thing and then releasing it. But at that point, kind of the damage is done. And so, I know YouTubers have been up in arms about the way that they administer the policy and the policy itself. But that's a shame, because it would be great if you got to a point where, editing it in wouldn't add like a ton of time. But like if we're talking about, for example, like that little speech by the prosecutor, that was really like a big focal point for our discussion. Like it would be cool to edit that in. And I was just thinking too, especially because you guys include like some like older obscure movies, that lends itself really well to like a searchable format like YouTube, where if you got like really into this movie that was less popular, you might be inclined to like do some searches on it. It shows up as like suggested off to the side. I know with us, like our one episode where we mentioned Jordan Peterson, he's so hot right now. Hans is so hot.
He's so hot right now.
That episode like shot up like hundreds and hundreds of views, just because of the way that YouTube search works. So it seems like there's potential there for like whereas like we're just rambling on random topics, you guys are like doing like whole episodes on movies, and like it just seems like you should be able to get some momentum from that.
Yeah, and I think
it would be good.
Yeah,
and again, you don't listen to Part of the Problem, but you should.
Well, I
But,
want
he'll
to,
do,
but there's only so much time.
Well, it's a really effective thing where you could, play a clip and then pause it and then talk about it and then, hit play again, talk about it some more. Because Dave does that all the time from his appearances like on FE Cup or some other kind of news story or whatever. And, I think it's a good tool. But, you're right. YouTube will strike it within, like a few hours or the first 24 hours, and then you go through the process of unstriking it or getting back and claiming fair use and getting it appealed. And by the time you get it back, a week has gone by and all your views have gone in the first week, and they go to, all your money goes to, Time Universal or whatever for all the work that they did for your video.
Yeah. All that beautiful work that they did for us to talk about their clip. But,
right. But Tony, we haven't done it very much, if at all. I can't remember, but we recently figured out how to, like, with the little mixer we have, to input like a laptop or a cell phone, and if we have like a clip queued up, instead of editing it in after, you just play it. You have it queued up. You play it, you listen to it. You can almost speak over it if you wanted to, and then it just works in seamlessly. It's really a drag that YouTube is doing that, because that just crushes the creators.
Yeah, I was able to do that with our episode on Sam Harris. When I talked to Trey, I was doing the clips live, right with the mixer, and it worked out really well, actually. What I had to do, though, it was a pain to prep for it, though, because I had to listen to Harris's podcast and then, actually
the humanity.
No, but I had to slice out all the clips and make
separate he's not that bad.
MP3s. That's a worth. I'm interested to see if you guys what you guys would think of that conversation. I don't know if any of you guys heard it, but Trey is good, and you probably don't have to listen to Harris's podcast to get a sense of what our critiques were, because I played probably 10 clips throughout the recording. That was a fun episode. Basically, it was.
Well, every time I've ever heard Harris talk about politics, he always seems to favor just getting the smartest guys in the room in there to do the job, and then everything will be, good or the best possible. He's a big technocrat.
Yeah, that's very dangerous.
Totally wants to defer to experts at all times. And of course, he's the expert, right?
Right.
Yeah, pretty standard shit. Just get the high IQ guys in there. What could go wrong?
What's that episode number there, Tony?
I think it's 37. Pretty sure it's 37.
All right. Have you guys considered
37?
Have you guys considered getting the short URL, the DWYH? I mean, it would be hard to say it for sure.
Yeah, I think it's taken. I tried to buy it, and I don't think it's available.
It never crossed my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot easier to say don't waste your hate .37 or -37 instead of DWYH. That's fucking hard to say.
It's easy to type, hard to say, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's the same amount of syllables, probably more syllables actually. DWYH, don't waste your hate. Yeah.
But Daniel, do you think you could maybe do some clips, or do you think that's just too much prep?
Well, I mean, I used to plug them in, and I could for sure.
You got that little machine that you make annoying sounds with.
I do, yeah. I've cut back on that. I've cut way back on the annoying sounds.
I'm a fan for the record.
You're a fan of that?
Yes, I love the soundboard. I've always been fans of the sound, because I watch a couple shows that use it, and everyone complains about it, and I'm always the only person. I'm like, oh man, love the soundboard.
Yeah, see, it annoys Robert, but yeah, I figure that the sound of my voice is annoying enough. So, speaking of the sound of my voice, there's a guy I do. We converse about selling on Amazon. He's also selling on Amazon, and that's something I'm working on. And he's a bit of a normie type guy. He's conservative type. He lives in New Jersey, so he made me think of you guys. Yeah. And I sent him the Last Nighters version of Find Me Guilty, and he listened to it, and he was like, dude, your voice is like made for radio. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. I think that my voice is terrible. But he didn't get like indignant or like upset about the things we were saying, which is great because like I told him it's, just this is the show I work on, The Last Nighters. I didn't tell him like, hey, this is our normie friendly version. Yeah. But he he dug it, which was great. I mean, and it gave me a lot of hope for the concept. As long as you don't say, hey, here's this like medicine that's going to taste really shitty to you. You just say, oh, here's, you want this ice cream cone? And you plug the pills into it, Like my grandpa, he used to grow strawberries in his yard. And I for whatever reason, I had like to take these horse pills. He would put them in the strawberries. And I would take the medicine that way. And he called me the strawberry crook because I would go out and pick the strawberries in the yard. And so he knew that I liked strawberries, so that's why he did it. I don't know why I'm telling you guys all this shit. But the point is, it's the Last Nighters version of the show is to not scare people off initially. And apparently it's effective because I can send it to this dude in New Jersey who I think is a Trump fan, and he wasn't put off by the things we were saying, even though everything we said was pretty much, like anarchist, really. I mean, like Robert said, we didn't hold back at all on this thing.
Yeah, and that might be, not to take credit away from your guys' skill set. I'm sure it mostly had to do with you. But, like I said, one positive takeaway, I think, from the movie for me was, again, that I think the typical person in our culture is willing to accept certain injustices and certain things that police and prosecutors and prison guards and that these people do, and it's like not radical at all to be like to show the things that they did in that movie and be like, oh no, this is like totally accurate. This is how it went down, and yeah, that makes sense. That's not all that foreign, and then people like know the mob story and they understand it. If they're being honest, they understand the prohibition of alcohol thing and where a lot of this stuff comes from. And so it really does provide sort of a unique story to push some of these concepts forward in, because there's no overly sympathetic character in it, in my opinion. I don't even think Jackie is a dude that most people are like, oh, this is a guy that I wish was like around my kids a lot. These are all like shitheads for the most part that have basically grabbed the power available to them in society. And like, I think you mentioned that episode, like certain personalities are going to be drawn to these various positions, whether it be a prison guard, whether it be a prosecutor, whether it be a mobster, if that power is up for grabs. And so, you're kind of left to just tee off on everybody and comment and say whatever thing you want. And that's sort of like, is it the package deal that they call it, right? Or I don't know. You get people to buy in on one thing, and then once they agree, this is how I convinced my dad on a lot of things in the beginning, is I would get him like totally on board with a particular thing and be all fired up, and then I would just bring up like an analogy, like some other issue where it was basically the same concept. He just never thought about it in that way before, and then he was confronted with that, and he had to make a decision. I'm going to be consistent here, or I'm just going to I don't give a shit. And that's always like an interesting decision point for people, like which direction they're going to go. Are they going to live with this conflict or ignore it, or are they actually going to like change their ideas? So it was a good movie choice, if nothing else.
Well,
right on.
That's awesome, man. And I feel like we could go a lot longer, but it's getting late for you guys, and I feel like our audience might be starting to drift, perhaps, because we're going about 2 hours and 10 minutes or so.
We'll take the hint. Yeah, no, it is getting late.
No, that's a good spot to wrap up on. I thought that was a good point.
Yeah, so
bring it back to the movie.
Yeah, exactly. So you guys are awesome. We really enjoy collaborating with you guys, and I think we're going to do another State of the Libertarian Union talk show next weekend, or this upcoming weekend, and that'll be a lot of fun. So I'm hoping that you guys can be a part of that. We got a dozen shows now as part of the Libertarian Union, and each of those shows is exhibiting maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 of the members, and those are a lot of fun. I don't know what the topic's going to be just yet, but we should probably figure that out in our group chat. But why don't you guys take a moment to just pimp out your show one more time and let the audience watching know where to find you guys. And I definitely recommend that they listen to you because you guys do a great job, and we're very impressed by you.
Go ahead, Jeff. I'll let you do this one.
Oh, man, you're throwing me to the you son of a bitch. Check us out at don'twasteyourhate.com, I think is the website, at Don't Waste Hate on Twitter. Try to be pretty active there, like to agitate, so and definitely feel free to interact. Don't Waste Your Hate on Facebook. We're looking to keep the content flowing. I'd be lying if I said that we had all our topics laid out that we're going to be talking about, but that's also the nature of the show. We're kind of just, what's sort of agitating us on a particular day. Usually it's something that we feel is not being covered that should, that more people should be upset about, that we're trying to bring to your attention, or conversely something that people are being hysterical over, and we feel is probably either deliberate misdirection or is just culture gone awry, and people should be focusing on other things. Check us out, and please reach out and give any feedback. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and thank you guys for having us on. It was a fun conversation, and I never would have heard of the movie otherwise, so thanks for sending it our way.
Well, that's all on Robert. That's his responsibility, so he's going to bear the consequences of that.
I'll take all the blame. I'll take all the blame on that one. Yeah, that was my find. I watched it and said, yeah, this is a movie we need to do. There's a couple other movies like that I watched recently. 3 Billboards Outside of something, Missouri or something like that.
Just watched it.
You did? What did you think?
The acting was excellent. The story was pretty good. There were a few parts that irritated me because it just didn't make sense, but that might be me. Would definitely be open to a conversation. But yeah, another similar where there's a lot of interesting themes, societal themes.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Explored.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of things that the characters do that you're like, whoa. Okay, then there's other ones that are like, oh yeah, I can see what you're doing. Yeah, lots of good things to talk about.
Yeah, and Robert, based on what you had told me about it, it sounded like if it's the government doing it, it's a hell no. But if it's a private voluntary thing, then it's kind of okay, even though it's sort of the same thing. That's one of the topics we talked about earlier in this Boys Night Out a little bit, and it's always interesting to extrapolate on those kind of concepts, I think, because
when the government gets their hands on things and they make a mess of it as usual. Well, it's not surprising since they're an organization completely predicated on coercion and violence, so you're bound to. Plus, they're a monopoly, so of course. But yeah. When dealt with in a market scenario, and I know this isn't making any sense to anybody listening to this but what he's talking about is, so the main character in the movie has her daughter raped and killed, and her response to this, her solution when the killer is not found by the police force, is when she's confronted with the cop, he's like, well, I'm sorry, we don't have anything to go on. She's like, well, just start taking blood from every man in the state. And you can imagine my reaction to the state just forcibly drawing blood from every man, assuming that he's guilty or whatnot. But it's done in a kind of voluntary situation where, innocent people are like, okay, well, I'm not guilty. Maybe I can blah, blah, blah. But then you can also worry about having your blood out there, and I don't know, there are all kinds of frame job movies. Anyway, the discussion is very interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into the weeds on that episode, so it'll be fun.
Yeah, we've talked about maybe doing that one next, but since Jeff has seen this, and it sounds like Jeff has some pretty strong opinions on it, maybe that can be another Boys Night Out, and if that's the case, I think we should spread this out a little bit and maybe do it in 2 to 3 months. Sure. As far as another Boys Night Out, because you guys have been great on this. I had no idea what to expect going into this. I thought that I don't even know what I thought, but you guys are awesome. I love you guys. I know we talked you up a lot in the episode, and if anyone hasn't watched or listened to that episode yet, it's actualanarchy.com/73, and if you want the normie-friendly version, it's lastnighters.com/16. But I don't think we actually mentioned you guys in the Last Nighters version, so we're not actually sending any traffic your way for the normies, but the anarchists are going your way, I think, and they should, because you guys are great.
That's all we want, anarchists only.
Yeah, and actually, you guys had talked about having technical difficulties before, and if I recall, our first appearance with you guys was fraught with technical difficulties. I think we recorded for about 4 hours and only got like 45 minutes of content.
Yeah, that was wasn't that a slut show?
No, it was a precursor to that.
I think
we
it
started
was us with Pat as well.
Yeah, we were talking about like that story about the guy posing as a porn recruiter or something like that.
Yeah, it was. There was like a whole consent conversation, a small consent conversation, I think, or sex worker conversation. I forget what the other larger one was.
I remember starting with a nice buzz and ending at like 3:30 a.m. like totally sober, dragging with a headache. So, and
you guys kept going back
with a bad computer and like a 20-second delay on when I would go to speak. So
yeah.
Come a long way.
Yeah, we have come a long way. But us too. I mean, it's been really good, and I'd love to be on your guys' show again.
Absolutely.
Because you guys are good, and let's do the 3 billboards in like a month or two.
I gotta watch it, but I will definitely check it out.
Yeah, it's good.
Sweet.
All right. Well, hey, I know it's late for you guys, so thank you so much for joining us. This is our Boys Night Out. It's our attempt to bring guests back in to get different perspectives, do our We Should Have Saids, and get some different critiques on our episodes and all of that. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Don't waste your hate. And for our YouTube watchers, we are the guys behind Actual Anarchy and the Last Nighters. We also do a bunch of other things like Read Rothbard, Black and Gold, The Conquest of Bread, a bunch of other things. So just put .com behind all of those except for the Black and Gold, and you'll find all the things we work on. And thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Later.
All right. Well, peace out, everyone, and we will catch you on the next episode. So have a good night.